Welcome back, everyone, to All Things Nerdy, episode 52. Today, we have a very special guest that has been a guest on our podcast before. And it's kind of like a full circle kind of thing. Today, we're going to be talking about poetry and then how poetic is it. That we had Carson on our very first All Things Nerdy episode with Nate and Joe. I'm Nate. That's Joe, by the way. So not only was Carson our very first guest, but now they are our 1 year guest. So today marks the 52nd week episode that we have been doing this. So a year today, way back when we talked about, Dungeons and Dragons and all of those things. Today, we're going to be talking about poetry because it's fitting and what it is for everybody. And I will be the first to admit I'm not the most well-versed person when it comes to poetry. So I cannot wait to hear what all they have to share and the exciting things that they have to say about it. Joe?
Nate has been excited all week just to be able to say that this is poetic. So I'm glad he was finally able to get that off his chest. Cool story about how we met Carson is we actually interviewed them for Vaco, and I looked at their LinkedIn beforehand, saw that they were a professional toast wrangler, was like super excited because it was just the posts they make were super colorful, stuff like that. And then they get on and they're in this like really like formal attire.
Oh, I forgot about this.
I was like, who is this? But we get to talking, conversating, and they open up and it was like, yep, they're hired. But I digress. Without further ado, Carson, talk nerdy to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I am super excited to be back. It is so poetic that it's been essentially a year. I can't even believe it. So much has changed, but I am super excited to talk to y'all about poetry, writing communities, and how to enter into this world that seems kind of like, poetry, what is that? That is my bread and butter.
Yeah, so I think that is the biggest thing, right? So poetry seems to draw a specific type of person. And we were talking behind the scenes, like poetry is for everybody. So walk us through your idea of that. Because when I think of poetry, like I'm like, it's kind of, I'm too dumb to understand most of it, right? Let's be honest. Let's throw that out there for everybody right now. I'm just too stupid to get it. But how, in your opinion, is like poetry for everybody? And I know there's like different writing styles and stuff like that, but like walk us through some of it.
Well, I honestly had a really similar experience when I was younger in like high school and college. I always dreaded the poetry units that we would have to study because I'm like, these are all old dead guys that are like doing these dumb rhymes that like, I can't relate to these. Like, why are we talking about daffodils? This is just like so boring. And people would get so much out of these poems. I'm like, I did not get that at all. How did you do that? And it just turns out I was reading the wrong poets. Like those poets were not speaking to me. They didn't have anything in common with my experience as a human in like the 2020s that was like just trying to exist. So I really think that you just have to find someone that is a little bit more in this scene, I guess, and is able to expose you to people that are able to speak the same language as you. Because there are some poets that get so heady and they have so many like hidden meanings, and it feels like you have to have like hundreds of years of knowledge in order to like parse through just like a sentence. But I really do think that once you find a poet that speaks to you, that is able to like shed light on your experience and feel like, oh, wow, yeah, I've been through that same thing. It opens up a whole world of like just words and language that you might not have had access to before.
Okay. So who is your go-to poet for you? Like, who do you love? Like when you just need a break and you want to escape and you pull out a poem book, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I have so many.
Well, yeah, before you get to like who do you pull out, like I guess who was like the initial like spark of like, oh, poetry is for me? Like who was that?
It's a great question.
Back when I was in college, I got exposed to the world of spoken and slam poetry, which is kind of more a like competition based, like people go up on stage. Yeah, the snaps, the like people shouting like, yes. And there's a poet named Andrea Gibson who got really big in the 2010s, was competing at a really high level, but was talking about like mental health and their experience of the world and what it was like to be like just a person that was different. And it just sparked something in me where I'm like, oh wait, like people talk about this and I can understand this. And it was just like their stage presence, their ability to just speak to normal people experiences of like someone in your life dying or something like going wrong in your life that you have to like rely on people that you love to get out of. Like it just really awoke something in me where I'm like, oh, it's not just like words on a page that's like a weird puzzle. It's people just talking about their life experiences in a way that like, I don't know, can really be relatable and comforting if you're going through the same thing.
Okay, so I know I asked you a question. We're going to sidebar that because I have
please.
so many other questions.
Yes.
Okay, so slam poetry and the other poetry that you said, but what really blew my mind is that you said she was competing at a high level.
Yes.
Poetry and competition do not go hand in hand to me like that. My mind is blown. So like, what is competing in poetry? How do you grade, rate, score, whatever it is? How is this lady like the LeBron James of poetry?
Well, so I am not super well versed in slam poetry because I am not someone that is very confident in like just reciting my poems in front of people and then getting judged and like on the spot. But essentially, you write a poem, you memorize it, you have to then speak and perform it to a panel of judges and an audience. And you get points based on your delivery, the content, like how well it resonates with people. And there are international competitions that people do this, and you can win lots of money. You can get book deals. You can find your like literary agent through this. And that was in the 2010s, that was how you became a writer in the mainstream. If you were in the realm of poetry, you competed in these, you would win competitions, and you would go viral on YouTube essentially. And so that was a really easy way to get like a contemporary audience, because otherwise you had to take these back channels to find like publishing houses that were willing to take your work and then hope that they would market you well. But it became this thing where YouTube became the platform for people to share their written work, because it resonated so well with like young people on the internet.
Don't kill me, but like in my mind, like I'm seeing like just like fancy rap battles going on. Like
sometimes it feels that way. Yeah. Like sometimes, yes. Sometimes there are like people like competing against each other. But also it can just be people just acting and like presenting themselves really powerfully on stage. It's really interesting. I haven't had the ability to go to a slam competition because the poetry scene in Nashville is actually not very there. We don't have a lot. I know we're a music city, I guess, but yeah.
What do you get scored on? That's what I want to know. Like, I know it's the perform, but like, is it rhyming? Is it just like, is it being able to amass emotions out of people? Like, what exactly? And then even if it is like how well you get emotions out of people, that is not like a concrete, that is like different for every person. And at that point, then you would streamline the traditional heartstring things, right? Like a child dying or something that would like get
that is everyone. A huge thing. Yeah. So there's this concept of like topics or phrases or words like really hitting. So like if you're in a slam poetry competition, you really want like poems that hit. So that means that they hit people's emotions, they really speak to people, and it is very subjective. And a lot of the times, which is kind of why I'm not really in the slam scene, you do have to elicit like really intense, sometimes negative emotions, because that is what immediately gets an emotional response out of like judges and the audience, because you really have to dive deep into these things. Sometimes people rhyme, but like honestly, in contemporary poetry, there's not a whole lot of rhyming that happens. Like I'm not going to say there's none, but it's not the like Mary Had a Little Lamb kind of like Dr. Seuss rhyme scheme that's happening. Like that's kind of the hurdle that a lot of people have to get over when they think of poetry today. It's not rhymes. It's not all of that.
I saw one video that was, or to me, it was pretty powerful. I think it was a guy on stage like performing his poem, and it was like my sons won't play with Barbies, and then it was like that was the title, and then he went into it, and I was like, ow, he keeps hitting me like.
Yes, I know exactly what poem you're talking about. I don't remember the name, but I have seen that video, and that's a really great example of a poem hitting like in the slam scene, like. You feel like you've been punched in the chest when someone reads that to you. Like,
I don't think I found any of that poetry.
He tries to trigger you with the first sentence. You're like, what do you mean? And then it's like,
yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But let's say if I was a judge, though. Now, I don't know the context of this person's poem or what like the meat of the poem is, but just from the one line, like my kids won't play with Barbies. Like for me, I don't have kids, nor do I care. So I would just be like, next.
Well, and sometimes people are just subjective. Yeah. Like most of the panelists are like established writers and like artists in the community. So they understand like kind of the accepted rules and mores of like, this is what slam is supposed to be like. But again, I haven't competed. I have not been to a slam in person, but that is just one aspect of like poetry today that like is different than what a lot of people expect when they think of the word poetry. Like there's competitions where you can like win thousands of dollars. Like it's crazy.
That is really cool. I like if I had to do it, I'd be like inflation. Like that's worry, that's fear, that's hate, that's like you're talking about emotion, inflation.
Yes.
You know, I got them. I'm going through to the final round. But anyways, Faisal, what up? I hope you're doing well, buddy. I hope you're crushing it. Thank you for stopping in and hanging out with us. So the slam poetry, the whatever other poetry, what is the type of poetry that you go for?
So I definitely am a big fan of, I don't know, it's hard to like put into words like this is the poetry I like, but I do really prefer accessible poetry. So that means that you can read it and you don't have to have gone to like college to know what they're referencing. You don't have to have like some sort of like secret knowledge. You can just read a poem and be like, I understand that this is about this experience. And it's just the combination of words and like how that person reads it that like really speaks to me. There's a couple like more classic poets like Mary Oliver. I will always love her work. She's fantastic. She was really big from like the 60s into the early 2000s. And the current poet laureate of the United States, Ada Limon, is extremely talented. I've gotten to take workshops with her and watch her read like live. And that is really deeply powerful to me. But I think anything that is like not too heady, that is able to elicit something like out of me that I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't think of the world that way. Or wow, I didn't know that people could put this like experience into words this way. Those are the things that I tend to gravitate towards, which I hope answers your question because that's a good one.
Yeah. And we do have a...
Stephanie says, Carson, are there different styles of slams?
So again, I'm not an expert in slam poetry, but I know that there are like duo competitions. So you can like go up with like a partner and you write poems that like you both are like kind of riffing off of each other, but it's already pre-written, but you're competing together as a pair. There's women only slams. There are like, I don't even know. There's so many different ways to do slam, but it tends to be the premise of you are reciting a written work that you have like already memorized, and you are just emoting very strongly to the judges. You are like showing how well you can like play with language and rhythm, and it is kind of like a rap battle a little bit at times. Like sometimes that's how it feels. So I hope I answered that question. I wish I was more immersed in the slam scene, but it has kind of died down since the 2010s.
Yeah. Is there such thing as like freestyle poetry?
I mean, yeah, I haven't like been to a slam where people like just do stuff off the cuff, but there are people that can just like pull something out of thin air and you're like, oh my gosh, like you can just do that with your brain. Like I have to sit and think for a while before I can even attempt that.
I do believe I'm a big believer in through Joe, all things are possible. So Joe, I think by the end of this podcast, if you want to hit us with a little freestyle poem, I think
I'll go right
Carson,
now.
and all the listeners.
No, I'll go right now. Let's try.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Psyduck is yellow. The Hulk is green. Nate, you're being really mean.
I love it. 10s across the board.
That was good.
Just stuff that I saw. We have another question. But so Stephanie, do you use prompts when getting started writing, or do you go off what you're feeling or going through?
That's such a good question. I personally do a mix of both. I honestly struggle to write on my own. Part of this conversation is talking about writing communities online. I am such a huge supporter of finding workshops where you can learn from someone that's more experienced than you, or like just being part of a writing community, because people can come up with prompts and exercises that really push you to try and write in different directions. As I've been doing that, I've gotten a lot better about like being able to just kind of sit with myself and kind of use poetry to process like what I'm going through day to day. But there's a lot of ways that you can enter into like a poetry writing space. It might be reading a poem and being like, oh, I really like how they did X, Y, or Z thing. I want to try that myself. And then you can play along with like that type of language or that type of form. There's like all sorts of different kind of combinations of words that you can do in order to really push yourself out of your own comfort zone with your writing.
So what are a couple writing communities you would recommend? Because my thought is like, if I go to Google and I look writing communities, right, like there's probably none or a lot that are going to pop up, right? So what are a couple that you would recommend?
So I actually got my start with online writing communities with this really amazing online community called Undercurrent that is run by the poet Desiree Della Giacomo. I can put, I think, that in the chat. She is a slam poet, and she has been teaching online and in person for over a decade. One of my friends was like, you would really like this. And it was like right at the tail end of like lockdown stuff. And I'm like, I guess, like, I don't know. I'm not like super into poetry, but she really like brought this community together that is really excellent and like supporting you and making you feel seen and heard and allowing you to like play. Even if it's not good, like you're going to have people supporting you the whole way. Also with next month is April, which is National Poetry Writing Month. And one of my dear friends, who is a poet named Tristan Richards, is running a poetry workshop every single day in April called Unfold. So it's a lot. She's crazy. I love her so much, but she is able to amass, like, I think last year over 60 people signed up for this writing program. And most of them that showed up wrote a poem every single day in April or more. Last year, I wrote, I think 70 poems in the month of April just because I was showing up as much as I could for her. But I know the link for that is bit.ly Unfold Writing. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend it. That is like the thing that really like catapulted me into being like, oh, I can write. This is cool.
You said it's bit.ly what? Unfold
Writing.
That's probably not right, but I did what I could for you. Bit.ly Unfold.
/ No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I edit it? I cannot.
Yeah.
You can delete it though.
Yeah, we'll get the right link up there.
And then also I run workshops too. I'm currently running one every Saturday this month. And then I'm going to take a hiatus next month so then I can do this everyday writing workshop with my friend. But I do that kind of every other month. And it is very fun. It's very fulfilling. It's one of those things that I've had so many people come in that are like, listen, I don't know how to write poetry. I don't even really like poems, but I want to try something new and this seems cool. And like by the end of the month that I'm working with people, they're like fully in like, oh yeah, poems, no big deal, I can do that. And it's super cool. It's such a cool experience.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, like, I'm not anti-poem. I just, like I said earlier, I'm just too dumb to understand most of them. So the poems that I would read or do read, like I have a favorite poet, which is the most cliche answer that a guy can give you probably. Now, my favorite poem is not one that is commonly, you know, said or recognized, right? But if I could understand them and they were just much more like just level-headed and not like trying to be in the clouds, like you called it heady or whatever, I think I would be much more inclined to be open to reading those and even writing those, because like going through school, which granted I grew up in Alabama, you know, like there wasn't a huge focus on poetry, but like I remember like haiku and all like the different and the rules that go along with it. Like it's just so like, look, I'm not good at writing to begin with. Now that you're putting all these other rules into it, I just have no desire to do it.
And it's not for like, it doesn't have to be for you, which is totally cool. But I feel like poetry is one of the forms of writing that people are like, listen, I don't get it, I'm not even going to touch it. And I feel like it's one of the most accessible forms of writing, because you can just sit down and write a poem versus like sitting down and like spending years writing like a novel. Like, you can do it. It's smaller, more achievable. And like, I don't know, it's a lot more accessible to me as someone that also works a job full time. It's a really great way to like have a creative output where it's like, look, I did this thing, and look, I did this thing even better next time. Like that has been a huge draw for me.
I think from an accomplishment standpoint, like you said, like you can spend 5 years writing a novel, and then even then, like the gratification by the time you finish it, you're probably gonna be tired of it. Like there's gonna be a high, like I've done it, right? But then you're like, God, I'm glad that's over.
Yes.
But with like a poem, you can sit down. I don't know how long it takes you. I'm just pulling from nonsense here, right? But I would assume 20, 30 minutes, an hour, you know, and then you're like, I'm done. I feel good. It wasn't long enough that you were tired of it, burnout. It was something you were excited, you know, from the start to the finish, and then like hyped about when you're done.
I mean, it took me like 3 seconds to write that one earlier, and I felt pretty good.
Whatever, Joe.
We love it.
I'm just glad I could be your inspiration.
You're my muse, Nate.
Doing what I can, man of the people, you know.
So, Carson, I do know, like a while back, you published a book, right?
I did, yes.
How did I not know that? Did I know that? I feel like I knew that.
It happened after we were working together. Like I did it the summer after, and it was a hard but really good experience.
So how did you balance, like, you know, navigating the publishing aspect of it, trying to get the commercial success right, and still like balancing the artistic and the creativity of it?
Honestly, I have to say it's because I had a really excellent editor who had already been through the experience of publishing her own work before. It was really nice to feel like I wasn't doing it alone, because I feel like if it was completely a solitary act, it would have been so much more overwhelming. But she is so much more organized than I am. Her name is Yoda Olink, and she really just walked me through step by step, like, this month, we're going to try X, Y, and Z thing. We're going to meet at this time to just talk about how you're feeling. What do we need to change? What do we need to do differently? I ended up going the self-publishing route for my first work, which honestly, I think is the best, like, for you to like see what it's like to format a book, market a book, like do it all yourself. So then the next time, if you have like a mainstream publisher, you can be like, all right, and now you get to do all of that, my guy. Like, it's a lot easier.
Well, share with the listeners, what is your book? Where can they find it? How much is it? How do they order it? Like, give us the deets.
If you look me up under my pen name, Carson Elliott, on Amazon, I have the book Celestial Bodies. It's a chapbook, which is a short collection of 12 poems, and it goes through like the seasons of the year, and it's just like a series of love letters to my community and the people that have supported me. And that was honestly just such a labor of love. I really appreciated getting that experience, and I am currently in the works of my first full-length manuscript, which is a whole different ball game. Like going from 12 poems to like over 60 poems, like, is a lot. But I'm very, very happy with the skills I learned from the small scale chapbook to going into a full length manuscript.
When do you think your manuscript will be out? When can people look for that?
Probably in the next year or two. It still is way early stages. I am not even done with like the first draft of it. And that is a process that you have to sit down for hours and hours and wheedle away at like the small little details versus like a poem. It's like, okay, I can edit this once or twice. A manuscript is like a body of work that you have to look at all of the poems as a whole. You have to really like work at, does this make sense for this to go into this to go into this? There's a lot more threads that you have to pull at, and it takes a lot more time. Like just my 12 poem chapbook took me 1.5 years to like put together. This is like 4 times that.
Do you have
Stephanie says that is so cool, and congrats.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So do you have a website where people can go see about you, maybe like feature poems or things that you add on there, and then maybe can order your book outside of Amazon, or maybe even a link to your Amazon?
Yeah. There's a couple different ways that you can reach me. The place that I am the most active is on my Instagram, and that is honestly the best place for you to find like online writing communities. I think Instagram has really blown up in its connectivity with artists, but you can reach me at carsonelliott.substack.com for my newsletter, and then I also have I will put my for Instagram in as well. Hey, it's Carson K. That's where I tend to be the most active. So if you want to catch one of my workshops, if you want to see what I've been up to, I tend to like spotlight the places that I've been published, which I've already gotten like 7 magazines and journals under my belt this year. So
Let's
like
go.
we are, yeah.
We're in the presence of someone big time right now. I don't think I fully understood, like who we had on here. Like
they are indie journals. I am not like working with the New Yorker or the New York Times or anything, but
nah, what you got is better. Yeah. We don't want them anyways. Don't undersell yourself. Yeah, you're out here crushing it. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like we should talk more. I just want to hype you in all things. Like this just like blows my mind, like how well you're doing with all of it. Just absolutely crushing it.
Thank you.
We're talking to a published artist here, Nate. We're talking to a published artist.
Dude, I know.
Multi-time, like, yeah.
I feel like I should have like read your book and stuff before. I feel so under like prepared.
Yeah, Nate.
Podcast.
Yeah, Nate. I own it, and
I didn't even know.
I commissioned a one-off poem, so they wrote a poem for my wife.
So Carson, something that has been happening from a lot of our guests on the podcast is I have been getting things, whether it's books, whether it's like what they're talking about and stuff like that. I'm happy to buy it, but would you be open to signing it and sending it to me?
So with Amazon, I don't have any signed copies on Amazon, but if you DM me, I can give you my address. You can ship it to me, and then I can ship it back to you. Because I don't have like a stock in my household of all of my books to ship out. But yeah, of course.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I don't mind. Yeah, so just like I'll message you on the gram or something, and then we can go back and forth. But ultimately, I can get one. I'll send it to you, and then you can send it back to me.
Yeah.
But I have like a signed comic book. I have a signed book. I have some other things that people sent me. At this point, awesome. I'm just collecting things from people on the podcast.
Nice.
Yeah. So I would like my question to be answered from the very first question in the podcast, right? I don't even really remember, but I have other ones. So who is your favorite poem, or what is your favorite poem?
Currently a poem that I have really been like vibing with and coming back to a whole bunch is called The End of Poetry by Ada Limon. She wrote it at the beginning of the pandemic when everything was kind of like the world felt like it was ending, and she was like, enough with all of this like bullshit from like all of these poets like talking about these flowery things. Like, this is crazy that everything's happening right now. And I just love that poem. It makes me choked up every time.
Man. Joe, what about you? What's your favorite poem? The one you said 20 minutes
I
ago?
don't have a favorite, but yeah, the one I recited 20 minutes ago, or maybe the one that I commissioned from Carson that I gave to my wife, right? So, but I actually looked up the Ada Limon one, so I'm gonna read that and see how cool that one is. Has to be good. But Nate, what about you? Didn't you mention your favorite poem was cliche earlier? But I don't remember if you actually said what it was.
So my favorite poet is Edgar Allan Poe, right? I actually had my wife for Christmas the first year we were together. I think it was the first year, bought me the full like collection of Edgar Allan Poe's poems and everything, and I keep it on my nightstand and everything like that. But like most people, they have one that they all go to. For me, I actually wrote a very lengthy paper on it in college, and it is called The Conqueror's Worm. And essentially, it is about time, how you can live your life, you can do whatever you want, but ultimately, time gets all of us. It doesn't matter how fast you run, what you do, and things like that. It's fairly short, but the type of poetry that I like is like dark, gritty, on the nose, very grounded. They're not trying to be the smartest person in the room. It tells a story, it tells it well, but there are layers to it that you can like dive into if you want. And for me, Edgar Allan Poe does that fairly well. I know some of his poems kind of spiral and get out there, but like this one was really good, and I cannot recommend it enough. Like if you were kind of not a poem person, but you still like maybe want to dabble, for me, I loved it enough to write a paper about it. So
yeah, he's a good one.
Yeah, and I mean he really fits the dark, gritty horror.
Oh yeah,
100%.
Well, Carson, we do want to be cognizant of your time. I did not ask behind the scenes, which I try to always do, if you have a hard stop or not. Joe usually has a meeting at this point that he's like, I'll have to run to this meeting because, you know, he works and whatnot. But so
how dare you?
I want to be respectful of that. Is there anything else you would like to share for any of our listeners, or anything that you just found really important about poetry, and you would just be remiss if you didn't throw it out there?
Honestly, like, I feel like give it a shot. I feel like the poems that we get taught in high school and college are just testing you on like, oh, are you smart? Can you come up with like a reason for this? When like it can just be something that can keep you company when you're going through it in life, especially like lately. It can feel really overwhelming and isolating to be in the world, and poets are very good at putting those feelings into words, and I just love it. It's such a cool art form, and I wish more people would give it a chance.
So if I was a complete noob and I wanted to get into poetry, and I see that Adam just commented and I have not read it yet. If I was a complete noob and wanted to get into poetry, who would be the poet that you would recommend? And I know it's going to vary based off who you're talking to, but let's just try to keep it as general as possible. Who would you recommend?
My poetry friends will know I am so basic for this, but Mary Oliver, honestly, deeply, truly, like, there's a reason why she is one of the most quoted, like, women poets of our time. Like, the poem Wild Geese is, like, up there, and, like, I think it needs to just be, like, chiseled into my DNA at this point. I've read it so many times. Yeah, I think she's a really good one. And she's just talking about nature and her experience with nature. And I think that's a very easy end, because you can look outside and be like, wow, there are trees and they're pretty neat. And she is like, yeah, but get this, they're really, really neat. So.
Okay. All right.
And we have to share this comment before we end here.
Yeah, we're going to end on this wonderful comment. Shout out to Marksman. Thanks for blessing us with this. Thank you.
It's roses are red, violets are blue. Nathan is bad at COD, but that's nothing new.
I love it. There's so many poets in the chat. Keep it up, y'all.
You get a score of 10 in our slam poetry competition, Marchman. Like you were moving on to the final round with burns like that, sir.
You got it. You got the lingo down and everything, Nate. I think you are a poet.
I don't know about it. I'm good at scoring people, so I can do that all day.
He can judge.
Yeah, I can judge. As long as like you need no merits. That's my home.
Yeah.
Well, Carson, thank you so much for being our first guest, our 1-year guest. We'll have you back. Well, A, whenever you want to come, but B, also
Perfect.
the 2-year mark, the 3-year mark, the 5-year mark.
I will be back whenever you want me. It is such a pleasure to hang out with you guys.
We do need to do another one about D&D and just like really diving back into it and what's new and going on in your world from a D&D perspective. And I have a campaign that I'm in, and we should definitely
talk more. Yes.
I know. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go on Amazon. I'm going to look at your book, all of that, and then I will find you on Instagram as well, and I will message you, and I look forward to getting my signed copy.
Yeah, of course. Thank y'all.
Yeah.
See you later. Thanks for joining us.